Before we dive into the specifics of sentence types and sentence boundaries, let's take a moment to examine the pieces that make up sentences. The small bricks we use to build larger shapes, and these larger shapes we use to build the final product. We've already explored the way that every word we might use in a sentence can be categorized into certain groups. Put simply, there are words that represent things, there are words that represent actions, there are words that represent qualities and quantities, and there are words used to join other words together. Thinking about how these words behave when we combine them together in sentences, we notice that thing words, like nouns, pronouns, noun phrases, plural nouns, when combined with doing words, like verbs that describe actions or states of being, are capable of shaping ideas. The sea swallowed the ship. She swims. The young and bubbly blue whale is... Some verbs require additional words to complete the idea they set out to share. The transitive verb swallow needs an object, like the ship, and the linking verbs like is and are need a complement to complete the formulation. The scientists are intelligent, even intransitive verbs, like swims, that do not necessarily require a completer. She swims is complete on its own, can be further complemented by additional descriptions, phrases, joining words, like prepositions. She swims beneath the waves. These words and these roles therefore form the small pieces that we might use to build sentences. This is how I would like us to think about sentences in this class. Strive to identify the blocks that build sentences in a similar way that we might understand how to build complex objects out of Legos. When we build with Legos, we start with small bricks and build shapes and stages. These initial groups of bricks don't really look like anything special, but we need them to combine with others in order to complete the design we're constructing. So too in sentences, there are words that combine with other words that will create shapes and stages. Some of these groups of words on their own don't make a lot of sense, but when we combine those words with other word groups, we can construct sound sentences. So let's examine these word groups and how they combine together. Consider how these nouns, verbs, and completers merge together to form groups that then combine to form ideas. We can identify at least two types of word groups here: phrases and clauses. Phrases are groups of nouns or verbs with their modifiers. The young bubbly blue whale is a group of adjectives, an article, a conjunction, and a noun. The verb phrase swallowed the ship and ravaged the sailors groups together verbs, nouns, articles, and a conjunction. Phrases on their own don't often make a lot of sense. Clauses, on the other hand, are word groups that we can identify that combine whole noun groups and whole verb groups together to form ideas in a way that is more complete. She swims beneath the waves. The sea swallowed the ship and ravaged the sailors. Within clauses, we actually use special terms to describe these noun and verb groups: subjects and predicates. Let's zoom in for a bit on these special terms, subject and predicate. A subject is the what or the whom a sentence is about. The subject is usually a person, place, or thing, and all the words that modify it. So any of these would be an example of a potential subject: a single word like Henry, or a noun phrase like mountains of confetti and deflated party balloons. Notice in this noun phrase there's only actually two things: confetti and balloons, but all of the other words grouped together to give us a picture we wouldn't have otherwise. A predicate is the motion or the action or the state of being that the subject performs or is in a sentence. The predicate includes the verb and any completers. So these would be examples of a potential predicate. A single word like runs, would supply the motion for a potential subject. Suck to clean up might be a description of a potential subject, its state of being. When we combine whole subjects with whole predicates, we create a group of words called a clause. And here are a few examples. Henry runs. My cats and dogs fight like lions and hyenas. Mountains of confetti and deflated party balloons suck to clean up. Enrique's jogging socks are smelly but festive. When a clause also expresses a complete idea, we call that clause independent. Now, this notion of a complete idea can be kind of tricky. It may help to look at a clause that does not communicate a complete idea to gain a better understanding. Here is a dependent clause. When Henry runs past my window. Sound like something's missing? Notice that this clause has a subject, Henry. It has a predicate, runs past my window. Notice also that when we drop the word when, we have an independent clause. Henry runs past my window. When we add the when, the clause suddenly needs something else to complete its thought. It becomes dependent on another group of words to complete it. So a dependent clause is a clause that, like an independent clause, includes a subject and predicate, but it also includes a subordinating word. Where an independent clause is also a clause with a subject and a predicate, but it does not depend on anything to complete it. It completes its own thought. Here's a simple way to remember. An independent clause contains a subject and a predicate and expresses a complete thought. A dependent clause also contains a subject and a predicate, but does not express a complete thought. This idea of complete thought is still pretty tricky in my experience. So here is a simple way to test for this concept of completeness. Use this formulation, they refuse to believe the idea that, followed by the blank line, and place a group of words on that line and read the statement out loud to see if it makes sense. Here's an example. They refuse to believe the idea that mountains of confetti and deflated party balloons. Something doesn't sound quite right. Let's look at another one. They refuse to believe the idea that when Henry runs past my window, again, something's missing. They refuse to believe the idea that Enrique's jogging socks are smelly but festive. Here we have one that makes sense. It sounds complete. But for good measure, let's look at one more. They refuse to believe the idea that when Henry runs past my window, we cheer for him. This one starts to sound awkward as did the one we saw earlier, but there's a group of words at the end that allows the idea to be complete. They refuse to believe the idea that when Henry runs past my window, we cheer for him. What this test is showing us is that certain groups of words put into this formulation hang in a way that's missing completers. Sometimes that's because we have a dependent clause, which is what we have here. The subordinating conjunction when is causing this clause to depend upon the independent clause to complete it. Or what we may have is a phrase. They refuse to believe the idea that mountains of confetti and deflated party balloons. Here we just have nouns. These nouns aren't doing anything. There's no verb or there's no predicate. So this test is a way to expose what a group of words is, a phrase or a clause, and it's also a test that exposes if it is a clause, if it's an independent clause, it sounds complete, or if it's a dependent clause, it sounds incomplete. So, this is how we will study sentences. If we are able to look at a final design and see within that design the shapes and the individual bricks that got us there, we will understand how that final design is constructed. And so this is true with sentences. If we can look at a whole sentence and within that whole sentence find the clauses and the phrases and the individual words that piece together that complete statement, that complete idea, that whole sentence, then we will have a better understanding of how sentences work, how to build them, and how to correct them.